Slater Crusaders. America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. It's impeachment trials, technically day 1, day 2, whatever. It's going to kick off here at noon Eastern. So coming up in 1 hour, and we will, of course, take you there live. We're going to talk all about it today. We are going to take a bit of a break, though, in the next segment. We're going to talk with Jason Riley, who is the man behind the new Thomas Sowell documentary, and we'll take any excuse to talk about Dr. Sowell whenever we can. So that's coming up in the next segment. But first, let's do a quick review of what happened yesterday with this impeachment trial. Trump's lawyers did a horrific job. Like, what were they doing? The question of yesterday was very specific. The question is this trial of a former president constitutional? So here's the deal. Last week or so, the Senate voted on if they should proceed with the trial, and there were 5 Republicans who voted yes, we should proceed. Yesterday, the question was, is this trial constitutional? If Trump's lawyers were able to convince those 5 Republican senators to vote with the Republicans and say, no, it's not constitutional, right? Then it would have stopped. The whole thing would have stopped. It would have been over yesterday. But they didn't do that. They just went on and on for 2 hours. Someone needed to tell them, guys, you have up to 2 hours. You don't have to fill the 2 hours. You're not penalized if you go short. Just like so absurd. We're gonna talk more about it with our guests coming up, but just like flaming narcissists. I don't even know what they thought they were doing, or who possibly in their life, if they got off the stage yesterday, who would be like, great job. That was perfect. It was terrible. I don't even think they touched on the question at hand. They were like high schoolers who are asked to go to the front of the room and present a book report in front of the class, and they never read the book. And the end result was, not only did they not convince those 5 Republicans to vote to end the trial right here and now, they lost one. 6 Republicans voted to proceed with it. It was a total failure. They had no idea who they were. Like public speaking 101. Public speaking 101, the very first question you ask is, who's your audience? Their audience should have been Mitt Romney, right? We're talking to the Mitt Romney and the 5 other Republicans. We're talking to you, like just no one else mattered. Just these 5 people. And they totally lost the plot and they blew it. So anyway, maybe I have way too high of a standard, but you're telling me in a country of 330 million people, no one, like those are the 2 best of the whole country? I felt bad for them. I feel bad for them now criticizing them, but like they're adults. It's not like the Senate just like stopped 2 random guys on the street and said, here, make the case for the president. You got 30 seconds to prepare. Man, that's what it felt like. Okay, so that was yesterday. Does not bode well for the next few days. So today, so the next deal, the prosecutions, the Democrats in the House, they have up to 8 hours for up to 2 days each day. So it's 16 hours total, up to 16 hours total, right? So 8 hours today, 8 hours tomorrow if they want to take it all. And they're going to make their case for I don't even know what, that Trump is like a horrible person. That's pretty much it. So what they're going to do is they're going to cut and splice video of Trump saying, and with scary music. Be prepared for the scary music. Can you do that in a real courtroom? Can you cut footage and then put behind them? But that's what they're going to do. So they're going to have footage of Trump saying, you got to fight. And then they're going to have behind that people in the Capitol breaking in. Look to see if any of the video they use is time-stamped. I guarantee you they're going to use footage of people breaking into the Capitol before Trump even started talking. But the big question is, this is not a trial for the people who broke in to the Capitol, right? They're going to have their own trials, right? And go to jail, whatever. This is about Trump. Can you hold Trump accountable for these other people's actions? That's the question. Can you hold Trump accountable for these other people's actions? Let me make an analogy here. Did you see the woman, I'm sure you have, yesterday, this woman in Louisiana who ran out of hairspray. So instead of hairspray, I mean, she's looking around, what can I use instead? She did what any of us would do, and maybe you haven't yet, but we all would, she used Gorilla Glue. And her hair has been stuck in place for a month. So, quite frankly, it worked. It's like the best hairspray ever. But she hired an attorney, and they're going to sue Gorilla Glue. Because the warning label says you shouldn't use on your eyes, and I feel bad for the person who used it as eye drops, or your skin or clothing, but it doesn't mention hair. And how would someone know not to use it on their hair unless it specifically said, do not use on your hair? Now, do you want to throw that nice young lady back up on the screen? I don't want to be judgmental here. But, I mean, not the sharpest tool in the shed. Are you with me? Just, right. Now, are we going to hold Gorilla Glue accountable for the actions of a lunatic? No, lunatic, that's strong. That's not. Sorry, that's. Let me go back. Are we going to hold Gorilla Glue accountable for the actions of an idiot? No, that's not. That's not even better. Are we going to hold Gorilla Glue accountable for the actions of a total moron? Are we? No, it's not nice either. All right, let me put this nicer. This is not helpful, Slater. Do you hold Gorilla Glue accountable because of the improper use of the product by someone who should have known better? No, of course no. Now, this is just an analogy. Analogies break down eventually. Somewhere that's what makes an analogy. So to maybe make it closer, let's say Gorilla Glue had a commercial. Let's say they had a Super Bowl commercial. And the Super Bowl commercial said, hey, buy Gorilla Glue. You can use it on anything. And this person took that as anything and put it in their hair, okay? Now, when Gorilla Glue says anything, you can put it on anything, we know there's limits to that. They don't really mean anything. And I argue the same with Trump. Can you hold him accountable for the actions of lunatics, morons, and idiots? Did he say things that were insightful? I mean, like, insightful to what? So the etymology of the word insightful means to rouse up. So sure, was it rousing? Right? If you were a Trump supporter and you were there, you'd be roused up. That's how speeches generally do. But if someone takes that and then breaks into the Capitol building, which is illegal, that's on them, right? If I was there and Trump said, we gotta fight like hell, I'd be like, yeah! I wouldn't go, that's a little personal responsibility here. Trump can't be held responsible for that. And I said this the week it happened. I don't hold people accountable for the actions of crazies. I don't hold Bernie accountable for the things he's said that caused one of his Bernie bros to stake out and try to murder the entire Republican baseball team. Right? Did anyone hold Bernie accountable for his rhetoric? The guy who shot Reagan, Hinckley, he did it to impress Jodie Foster. Should we hold Jodie Foster accountable? So the truth is closer to something like, if Trump could do it again, perhaps, and we could always temper our rhetoric, right? Perhaps Trump could be a bit more specific, although he did say peacefully march down to the Capitol, right? So sure, you could change things a little bit, but don't think for a second, do not think for a second that if Trump won the election, that Biden and his Biden supporters would not be literally burning buildings to the ground. Do you doubt that? Do you have one shred of doubt? And this is an honest question for our Democrat friends who are listening right now. Be honest, and you don't have to say out loud, just to yourself. Do you have any doubt that if Trump won, the Democrats and the media would have said Russia hacked the election, Trump stole. Remember Trump slowed down the mail? Do you remember there was an actual congressional hearing with the Postmaster General? There was real outrage that Trump was slowing down the mail and removing the blue post boxes to prevent people from voting, right? The left was setting the stage for all the accusations that they could possibly throw to say that Trump stole the election. For the love of Pete, the week before the election, PBS NewsHour had a 14-minute story on how easy it is to hack into Dominion voting machines in Georgia. PBS NewsHour, all right? So do you think that if Trump won the election, the left would say, darn it. Well played. Well played, Mr. President. See you again in 4 years. No way. I'm as certain could be there would be actual fires and riots and violence across the country. Prior to the election, cities boarded up entire downtowns. Cities across the country boarded up their windows down, all the downtowns. And then Biden won. And then they took the boards down. Why? Because they weren't trying to protect themselves from Trump supporters. They were trying to protect themselves from people on the left in case Trump won. Everyone knows that. Do you doubt that? And what happened after Biden won? Yeah, the widespread calls of voter fraud, voter irregularities. There were laws that were absolutely broken. We talked about all of them on the show here. And in spite of all that, there was no violence. Not a lick across the entire country. Remember this right after what happened on January 6th? The FBI sent out warnings to capitals across the entire country, warning of more extremist violence at their capitals, whatever. This is the riots that happened in Albany, capital of New York, after the insurrection. One guy showed up. One guy showed up to the capital of New York State. One. There was no violence across the entire country. None. Instead, we look at one case from the people who are probably the most extreme, right? They were the ones who would travel to D.C. for something like that. And they act like... There was a 60 Minutes Leslie Stahl interviewed Nancy Pelosi. And we'll have to play this clip tomorrow. And they both go into her office. And she broke a mirror, or the protesters broke a mirror. And Leslie Stahl goes, oh, wow. Oh, they broke the mirror. We're acting here today like Trump took over the military and invaded the Capitol with the 101st Airborne. Lighten up. You know, in Myanmar, there's a real coup going on, like an actual military coup. I don't know the players involved with it, but the military's taken over the country. They shut down the entire internet. And the military is telling people not to be upset because if you protest against what we're doing, you're destroying democracy. So the left today is having a fever dream as if this is what we're living through and lived through, they're having a fever dream about what happened on January 6th as if we're living through what Myanmar is actually going through right now. Don't get sucked into their game. Get a little perspective. It wasn't that big of a deal. Trump did not open up the armory and hand out grenade launchers. And his rhetoric wasn't anything beyond the pale. Hold it up against the left. How about Kamala encouraging you to donate to a bail fund so that Black Lives Matter rioters who got arrested could post bail to go out and riot again? If Trump lawyers can do this right, and I don't have a lot of hope that they can, but if they can do this right, they can judo this whole thing and make it backfire on the Democrats. But based off of what we saw yesterday, we'll see. All right, got lots more coming up. Let's take a break on this. We'll talk about Thomas Sowell, this new documentary about him. You must watch it. We'll talk about that coming up next, and then we'll get back to the impeachment, which starts at noon Eastern today. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, we're not going to talk entirely about the impeachment trial that's going on right now today. I want to highlight for you a wonderful work of art that I encourage you to watch, and to watch with people who may not know enough about the wonderful man that is Thomas Sowell. The documentary is called Thomas Sowell, Common Sense in a Senseless World. And the narrator is Jason Riley, who's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Mr. Riley, how are you, sir?
I'm good, thank you.
I need to briefly ask you about the impeachment here, but maybe we can look at it through a Thomas Sowell lens even. How would a Thomas Sowell and that type of thinking look at this or any thing that's going on in our country today? How does he think differently?
Oh wow, I don't know what Tom makes of the impeachment. Unfortunately, he stopped writing his column a few years ago. I'm sure he would have weighed in if he still was writing the column. But you know, I think that he would recognize what's going on for what it is, which I think is that the Democrats see hatred of Donald Trump and keeping him front and center as a way to unite their party, unite their base. You know, they have a lot of divisions going on, but inside on the left, but they know that Trump unites them, and I think that this is a way to keep them united. The question is going to be whether they overplay their hand here, and I think maybe in the way that they've gone about trying to impeach or trying to convict the president with this incitement claim may be overreach in terms of getting a conviction.
Yep. Can we speak a bit about human nature and how Thomas Sowell viewed that? And one of my favorite things about him is he noticed how progressives view the world as it ought to be or how they want it to be, but he viewed the world as it was. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, he talks about this in one of his favorite books that he's authored, and that is A Conflict of Visions, where he lays out these two views of the world, and it really is about human nature. And he talks about how human nature informs our views of politics and public policy. And he talks about the constrained vision and the unconstrained vision. And the constrained vision is the one that says, you know, there's sort of a tragic view of human nature, that we are imperfect, and the best that we can hope for is to put in place institutions and policies that hope for the best but expect the worst. And versus the unconstrained vision, which says intentions are what matter most. Anything is possible, and we can move toward a state of sort of human perfection if we just try hard enough and have the right policies in place. He says that's more utopian and unrealistic, and he sort of takes the more tragic view, the more constrained view of human nature.
I think one thing that I like about him is he realizes that the constrained view, the tragic view, is not the appealing view on the surface. So how is one to counter the utopian view if it's so much more appealing?
Right. And as you put it earlier, I think is the best way to put it. Tom concerns himself mainly not with what we hope will happen when a certain policy is put in place, but what actually happens. The intention is not the point here. We want to know what works and what doesn't work. So, for instance, if you say that allowing colleges to accept people based on race, letting that factor into an admissions policy will help blacks. Well, that may be true, that may not be true, but let's look at the evidence. What has actually happened when schools have done that? Have graduation rates gone up? Has the black middle class grown appreciably as that policy is put in place? And Sowell says, no, let's look at the track record. When the University of California stopped using race-based admissions, college graduation rates for blacks went up by 50%. For Hispanics, they went up by 50%. So a policy that had been put in place to help blacks, a well-intentioned policy, in practice was having the opposite effect, was resulting in fewer black doctors and lawyers and architects. And so Sowell says, regardless of the intention of this policy, this is what has actually happened. And whether we continue this policy should be based on outcomes, not intentions.
And I love the part of the documentary where it talks about his experiences at Cornell that caused him to start to ask those questions you just spoke of. Please, everyone, watch the documentary, Common Sense in a Senseless World. Mr. Riley, there's obviously a great quip of his. He used to be a Marxist, And Dave Rubin asked him, what stopped you from being a Marxist? And he said, facts. So that's good, but that doesn't help everyone. Right? So what is it that made him even want to care about facts when it stops so few people from thinking these wrong things?
Well, I guess it was just his mindset. And even before he went to the University of Chicago, he was someone who thought this way about the world. He says it was instilled in him in junior high school, I believe, by a science teacher, that facts matter. And then when you get to a place like the University of Chicago economics department, where he studied under people like Milton Friedman and George Stickler, empiricism, following facts is what mattered. And that was sort of drilled into him. And that's the approach he's taken, whether he's writing about economics or race or education or any other topic. Tom wants to know what the facts are, and if they bear out what people are saying about this policy or that policy. But again, it's something that I think we should expect of all of our intellectuals and scholars. It's amazing that someone would stand out simply by following the facts where they lead, regardless of whether where they lead is a politically correct conclusion or not. It's amazing to me that that's where we are right now in society, where you praise someone for following the facts.
How do you think his father and then shortly thereafter his mother passing away when he was very young affected him? Obviously, he went to go live with his aunt and moved to New York City and like that life trajectory, but more emotionally, how do you think losing his parents changed him?
Well, his father passed away before he was even born, so he never knew his father. And his mother died in childbirth a few years after Tom was born, when she was giving birth to a younger brother of Tom's. So he has very, very vague memories of her. So he was essentially orphaned, and he was raised by a great aunt who adopted him and raised him along with her two adult children. So Tom sort of sees it as an advantageous upbringing, and that he was raised around essentially four adults, because one of the adult daughters was married and the husband lived with the family. So Tom was almost raised like an only child with four adults, and he says that was a huge advantage growing up, despite the fact that they were poor, despite the fact that they didn't have a lot of material possessions and so forth, and that the family was not particularly educated. He had four adult role models, and he thinks that was something that gave him a huge advantage in life.
I want to go to the probably the thought that has most changed my life, and I think about it daily, literally every single day. It comes up in every aspect of my life, and that is the idea that there's no such thing as solutions, only trade-offs. And I love how you did a wonderful job tying in his love of photography into that concept too. Can we speak to that for a minute? Because it's everywhere, nonstop, every decision that's constantly made. But some people don't get it.
Yeah, and that goes back to Tom's constrained vision of human nature and what is possible. So there are trade-offs in life, and Tom believes in that thoroughly. That throwing all of your resources at one thing leaves less or fewer resources to throw at something else, and that's just a sort of grounded, realistic view that he brings to his scholarship. And so you can't throw everything at every problem. You have to prioritize. You have to decide what's most important. And Tom has made a life as a scholar pointing that out. And it sounds like a very simple and obvious point, but it's something that our public policymakers and our politicians ignore. They like to claim that they can be all things to everybody. And Tom says, no, if you're going to spend money on this, it's going to be less money on this. If you're going to spend time doing this, it's going to be less time doing that. And one area where Tom has really reiterated this is the civil rights movement. and what they have prioritized. And so, for instance, since the 1960s in particular, they've prioritized gaining political power. And they said, if we just elect more blacks, it'll to higher office, it will bring along blacks economically. And Tom said that there have been trade-offs to that approach, because that has been less time focused on the development of black human capital, which Tom says would be time better spent. Because when you have that human capital, when you have those skills and attitudes and behaviors that are conducive to upward mobility, it really doesn't matter what the color of the president or the lawmaker is. You're going to be okay. So Tom says that time spent by the civil rights movement pursuing political power has come at the expense of time spent developing human capital among blacks, and that has been one of the trade-offs.
Really interesting. And I think he said the counter to that is like Japanese Americans who have not spent time seeking higher office yet have one of the highest incomes in America as a group.
Yeah, he's pointed that out among a number of groups. The typical pattern has been that groups have not pursued political power first. They've pursued economic stability first and worried about politics later. And the one counterexample to that has been the Irish, who, of course, were very politically successful early on. And they were, you had these Irish-run political machines in big cities like Philadelphia and New York and Boston in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And Tom says, but the Irish middle class was almost non-existent and didn't really begin to grow until the decline of those political machines. And so blacks have sort of taken the Irish route here. And as a result, the Irish were one of the slowest to rise economically of all the immigrant groups from Europe.
Wow, so interesting. Mr. Riley, we have to run. Obviously, we could talk about Thomas Sowell forever. He's only got 10,000 books. But I want to encourage everyone, and I love this analysis we just did. Like, I get so fired up about this because I love the way he looked at cultural differences between peoples and does this analysis between like, oh, Chinese immigrants. No, Chinese immigrants from where and from when and who lived in what geography that affected them as a people and came, right? It's like, I love that detail. So on that point, what is one book? If someone's never read a Thomas Sowell book, what's the first Thomas Sowell book they should read?
Well, Tom put out a sort of sample of his scholarship called the Tom Sowell Reader, the Thomas Sowell Reader. And you might start with that. It's got collections of his columns. It's got a couple chapters from various books and so forth. And so I might start there, give you a nice broad range of Sowell's writings over the decades.
And first, know who the man is by watching the documentary Common Sense in a Senseless World. It is free on YouTube. Common Sense in a Senseless World. Mr. Riley, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Take care.
I'm grateful, and he's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. I'm just grateful to Thomas Sowell. With all the videos on YouTube, can get out to more younger generation and live on forever. I would recommend Black Rednecks and White Liberals. It's absolutely fantastic, among many other. All right, come back to impeachment next. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Senator Crusaders, coming up about a half an hour, a little less than that, 20-some minutes. We're going to go back to the Capitol and go back to the Senate trial of the president, the former president's impeachment. The former is the key part of this whole ridiculous story. Before we go to our next guest, I just came across this tweet. New House impeachment managers, that's the Democrats, will unveil previously unseen Capitol security footage as part of their presentation today. Democrats will offer a devastating case against President Trump, according to senior aides on the impeachment managers team. Breaking news, the Democrats say they're going to do an amazing job today with their presentation. They say that Trump committed, quote, the most heinous constitutional crime possible. We have the goods, we will present the goods. I don't know what the constitutional crime is that they're even accusing him of, quite frankly. Scott Hounsel's here, one of our friends from Red State. What's up, Scott?
How goes it, Mike?
Excellent. Good to talk to you, brother. Before we get to the Democrats' case, did you see the Trump's lawyers yesterday and how ridiculously horrible of a job they did?
I was actually
Can you hear me?
President's response or President's team's response.
I'm sorry, Scott. Say that one more time. I lost you, brother. Say it again.
it was a disaster. It was a disaster making it so far off with everything that they were presenting. They were all on the map with their statements that they made, their comments. That even in the intro, he said he was working for the wrong side. I mean, it was a disaster all through.
Like, what were they trying to do? Did I don't even know what the attempted effort was, and they weren't even skilled at it. Like, I almost feel bad talking about these guys. It was as if we just like randomly picked two guys off the street. They did so bad. What was their even intended goal?
So I wonder if they if really what it comes down to, I genuinely believe, is that everyone obviously has been blackballed by the media, has been put into a camp of craziness, that if you work for the president, you're nuts. And so the choices for the president's defense team were so thin that this is the best he could come up with. I mean, Alan Dershowitz was extremely upset about the response that they had. And it was insane, like I said, to watch it occur. Was how can you reach this level of incompetence with someone who is probably being paid a pretty penny to do what they're doing?
Yeah. It doesn't bode well for what they're going to do after the Democrats' attempt here. So what do you make of what the Democrats are going to try to do today, right? As they said, it's the most heinous constitutional crime possible, what the president did. What fever dream are they living in, that what happened on January 6th was the worst thing imaginable, worst thing possible?
It certainly was bad. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you shouldn't have people violently entering the Capitol for any reason. But the fact remains is the worst thing? Probably not. And in addition, can they definitely say that it wouldn't have occurred without Trump? And the answer to that question is no, they can't. To me, it's as I've said previously, it's political theater. They know the result is already known. There's not something up in the air of whether or not this is going to end up, convicting the president. The result is already known, that they're continuing through with it anyway. Probably as a means of having something to stick to certain people within the Senate in 2022 and 2024. But the fact remains is that it doesn't change the result of the impeachment trial. And so this is just purely political theater at this point. The Democrats know this, and yet they continue down the same path that they're on right now.
Not only is the result known, as you said, meaning he won't be convicted, but there's no punishment that can even be administered anyway. So the whole thing is completely worthless, other than the political things as you talked about. But what?
Well, actually, I don't mean to interrupt, Mike, but there is one thing. The only thing that they are doing is preventing him from running for federal office again. So if they were able to convict him by some crazy stretch, the worst thing they could do is prevent him from running for president again. That's essentially it. So yes, you're right. There is no official punishment. They can't boot him from office. They can't prevent him from running from office again at some point.
We had a constitutional professor on yesterday, Scott Tillman, who he makes the argument that you can't even do that because it was Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 or whatever, says officers of the United States, and his claim is, through some roundabout way that I can't repeat here, that the president isn't an officer. What that really means is he couldn't be appointed to another position in the White House. So he couldn't be a secretary position, but he could run for elected office again. So, but his ultimate point was, it's up in the air on even that point. But
they would have to file a suit of some sort in court and probably go to SCOTUS, and that would be a long, arduous process, and one that, knowing exactly how the members of the court have voted in the past with things that I don't agree with necessarily, I wouldn't have the faith that they would make the appropriate choice anyway. So here we are sitting here with this issue.
Yeah, and for a man who would be 78 at the time, and it's a moot point, and it's ridiculous. So let's talk about the politics.
Correct.
How could, let's say Trump's lawyers were the most skilled, like no one's better. They're like the master of political judo. How could they turn this around and have it backfire on the Democrats?
Frankly, I think the point is that I think what the issue is yesterday is they didn't provide a bright line or a line between what is conviction and what is not conviction, or what is Trump was guilty of something, or what was Trump was guilty of something. In my particular case, could you prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the riots in the Capitol would have occurred absent Trump? And the answer to the question is no, you couldn't prove that. But you also can't prove it the other way, and that is that they would have occurred with Trump, or they would have occurred. They wouldn't have occurred without him either. So the fact is that you can't have it both ways. You can't have it. Trump's guilty of this. Trump incited this riot. It wouldn't have happened regardless. But the fact is that a lot of people would have been up there anyway had it not been for Trump. Trump's rhetoric, or whatever the argument they're using, was violent or.
Yep. I want to, Scott, we got to run.
Cited the violence.
We got to run. I want to have you back on again next week, because I love this article you wrote at Red State about the Capitol Police and how they say that they're exempt from Freedom of Information Act requests, which is bonkers. And that's where a real investigation needs to be made in who dropped the ball in whatever level of law enforcement, the mayor of DC, whoever, because this whole thing could have been prevented if they had just a decent level of security. So could we chat again next week about that?
Right. Absolutely, good, Sarah. Looking forward to it.
Let's do it. Thanks, man. Redstate.com, Scott Hounsell, Hounsell. And just look up his most recent article about the Freedom of Information Act and the Capitol Hill Police, which should be the story that we should be focusing on during this trial as well. All right, coming up next, we'll talk to a man who worked with the president on his economic council, and we'll get his insight into what Trump is thinking right now and what he's doing and what he's planning on doing next. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, coming up here, just about 5-10 minutes or so, we're going to head over to D.C. and we'll kick off really what is day one of the official trial of the former president. Yesterday was the constitutional question of, is this constitutional to move forward? It was a simple majority vote, and Trump's lawyers absolutely blew it yesterday. But alas, now we start the next step. So it's up to 8 hours each day for 2 days, the House Democrats get, and then Trump, same thing, up to 16 hours total over 2 days for their defense. And then we move on to witnesses, and then they move on to questions. And good night, this thing could go all the way till Monday. But today it officially kicks off. So we'll see what the Democrats can put forward against the president. I want to go to Casey Mulligan. He's the author of You're Hired, Untold Successes and Failures of a Populist President. He was the chief economic advisor to the White House Council of Economic Advisors, and he's a professor at the University of Chicago of Economics. Mr. Mulligan, how are you, sir?
Hey, Mike. Good, thank you.
Good to talk to you again. So what do you think? You've worked with the president, right? What do you think the president is thinking right now, just based on what you know of the man? What is he thinking right now as he's watching all this and taking it in?
I mean, one of the things that I learned from him is he plans ahead for the future. He's building up capital, not just building buildings in New York and cities around the world. Anytime he's in a situation which seems bad to so many of us, he's thinking about, what can I take out of this? Maybe to ding my opponents, maybe to put myself in a position next week, next year to do something even better. So I'm sure he's thinking about those sort of things. What sort of assets can he bring out of this bad situation?
Gosh, that's true. What could he possibly be bringing out of this, especially based on how bad his lawyers did yesterday? I wonder what he's thinking that he can do. Huh.
To have, if he were to run again and, have a court challenge about bills of attainder or whatever, and say, people, you should decide, Congress doesn't get to pick who gets to be on the ballot. That could be an asset that he could run pretty far with.
Wow. Yeah, interesting. He's always a couple steps ahead. The whole basis for this, I believe, is this fever dream over the last 4 years that the left's had, that Trump is a dictator and a tyrant and all the rest. Is Trump a tyrant?
No, he's very much about giving the people, giving the localities the decision-making power. He did not want to bring the power into Washington. That's one thing that got him in a lot of trouble with the different agencies and bureaucracies and interest groups in Washington. They want to keep the power there. So you saw with the COVID, he said, DeSantis, do what you do best. You know Florida better than Washington, D.C. does. And so he was very much delegating power, which is probably unnatural in Washington. And he didn't fit in that way.
We did a segment a while back about the Reichstag moment. Some progressive wrote an article about Trump's Reichstag moment or something. And I was like, no. COVID was Trump's Reichstag moment. That was the moment that Trump could have consolidated power in D.C. in unprecedented ways. And he didn't do it at all. And that takes someone with a principled conviction to not take power when it would have been so easy to take power, right?
Yeah, I think not just the principle, which is important, but also just how well it works when you let the people decide. The president's been around for a long time, and he has a lot of experience in a lot of things, and he's seen how well it works when the people get to decide. And so that empirical success as well as the principle, I think, pushed in that direction. And we were lucky we didn't have somebody who there to grab power as they have in many other countries during this pandemic.
That's right. Do you think, and we'll find out what the prosecution says today, but do you think anything that Trump said in the build-up to January 6th and on that day incited people to do things that they wouldn't have otherwise done?
No, I think Trump is very good at reading the pulse of the people, and they're upset about a lot of things, including about how the election was run. And he's just reading that pulse and reacting to it, not creating it.
What about the argument that he should have read the pulse and lowered the temperature of the room?
Yeah, there is something to that argument. Now, it's not a crime to not lower the temperature of the room. Sorry, I'm not a lawyer, but not doing something, it's not a crime. But I could see a statesman might say, that's part of the job. You should go out there and lower the temperature when you sense that it's hot.
Is that impeachable? That's the question today.
Yeah.
Is it as we played earlier, the managing team, the Democrats, they said Trump committed the most heinous constitutional crime possible. That seems like a bit of an exaggeration.
It's the way it always goes. It's very much entertainment rather than a legal proceeding or a due process or anything like that.
Yeah, and that's what today is. What a shame. Would you say that Trump was successful in draining the swamp? I'll answer that for you. No, but are there some things he did that we can point to that he was successful at? What do you think?
Well, there were successes and failures, and they're both around the swamp. There was so many times I thought he was going to be able to drain the swamp, and he didn't. In some areas related to the auto companies, auto companies pretty much riding the auto regulations that's letting the swamp do it. But there are other cases like Operation Warp Speed, which may be the most important thing in our lifetimes in terms of government policy. Very much the regulators want to slow walk that and take their time. They're in no rush, but it's extremely important to get out these vaccines here before the end of 2020, which President Trump did, even though the bureaucracy said it was impossible. He did it. And so he got the swamp out of the way. And now swamp will probably fill back in with more water, probably has already on January 21st. But he definitely had some important successes that are affecting our lives even as we speak.
If you want to read more about him and the missed opportunities, You're Hired, Untold Successes and Failures of a Populist President, the former chief of the Economic Council, Casey Mulligan. Thanks, Mr. Mulligan. Appreciate you.
You're welcome, Mike.
Have a wonderful day. All right, let's head over here in just a few minutes to D.C. We'll see the Democrats' case against the president, former president. That's the whole point, former president. When they show clips and videos, look for timestamps. I doubt they'll even include them, but question that. What's the timing of it? You're going to see videos of people rioting. Where was the president? What did he say at which point? And is he, in the end, ultimately responsible for any of it? We'll see what case they make. True story. Mike Slater, keep it right here on The First.